I'm told I have to have objectives for this talk, so here they are. Basically, they're modest objectives. I will mention James Reason's some of James Reason's concepts in here, and I think they do apply, and I'll show you how I think they apply. And we'll talk about two different types, making one of many different typological distinctions, but we'll make one here that I think is relevant to highly automated labs in particular, and then talk about, or finally end up with some philosophical musings at the end, if you will, a little homily on types of organizational response and the trouble we get into that way. The topics actually, where we're going to come about this by looking at a case study of our institution. I left out the, but you know, of course, that we are the Ohio State University. And we have made it into the Guinness Book of Sports Records this year. Those of you who follow these things will be aware that we have, probably for the first time in recorded history, lost the final championship game in two different sports within a 12-month period to the same school, who will remain unnamed. Anyway, I'm going to actually talk about I'm going to share some of our other dirty laundry here today as well while I'm here with a near miss, talking about ironies of automation, and then finally again this little homily. Okay, so first of all, a lot of facts and figures by way of history of what we did. When we did this, by the way, was back in the last century. It was 1999 when we really first went, September of 1999, we first went live. So our pre-automation, so facts and figures for a while, so bear with me here because it'll take some facts and figures to tell the story. This is our pre-automation configuration. We had two Johnson & Johnson Vitros 950s analyzers. They're excellent analyzers, and a 250. And one Coulter Stack R. That was what we looked like pre-automation. And this is what we looked like in terms of what the people looked like pre-automation. We had a total FTE complement in this area, these areas of 65.7, broken down as you see there, and with paid hours on the order of 161,000 and worked hours at 136,000 per year. Just some ratios of so we can sort of track baseline changes with automation. And by the way, I've been recommending strongly to various people I've talked to today that some of the ratios and numbers that I put up here today might be good things for you to look at now as a baseline, so that you can track your progress and your trajectory. And also, I would just, and frankly, would love it if you'd do that, so that then maybe we'd have an N of 2 institutions in the country that had done this and could compare notes, and maybe we could publish together. Who knows? But it'll take you years to get the data, unfortunately. So our annualized build tests, we were a much smaller lab then, actually, 3.38 annualized build tests. That number is more like 6.3 million now, and again, it's exactly comparable, as I understand it, to you. So we're comparable in many ways. Discovering this baseline, getting this baseline data was our first occasion to actually learn how many process tubes we had, and we got that. And looking at the number of processed requisitions per week, of the fraction of those that were inpatient, and the fractions, of course, notice the number is the same, that were manually processed. Our turnaround time, average receipt to result turnaround time in April of that year for all priorities across the board was 42.7 minutes. That's within lab. And again, that's just a portion of the real turnaround time, you know. I mean, don't look at that number and say, oh gosh, they're good. And we weren't that good. And 42.7 is probably comparable to your number at any point in time previous. steps in the order entry process. Let me back off for a minute and say how we got these numbers. We had, of course, we were kind of a showplace site. We were really the second, I think, major installation in the country of the Beckman-Coulter IDS Total Lab Automation System. And so Beckman put a fair amount of effort into documenting what we were about and what was happening. And part of that was we got the chance to have a consultant who's an industrial engineer, Michael Gannon from Canada, came and hung out and actually literally camped out on all shifts with a clicker in his hand and stood by while people did things and actually counted, did all that time and motion stuff that you hear about. It actually got done in our place. Again, if you can, I'd recommend you do it too. So again, there'll be two of us that have gone through this nonsense. But you see, we got a fairly reasonable, statistically valid estimate of the number of individual manual activities, or as we've been talking in our conversation today, touchings, if you will, in each one of the processes. So here there are 6 major steps in order entry at that time, and 32,866 touchings or individual manual activities involved in order entry. We had 4 steps, again, this is all pre-automation, 4 steps in specimen processing, and 42,500 manual activities or touchings per week involved in that, for a total of 75,000. So the ratio of, and again, some ratios of the order entry to specimen processing, bear with me, this becomes important later as we get into the story. But basically notice those ratios are reversed. And then Gannon actually translated some of his button pushing, some of his counting to estimates of actual opportunities, handoffs of or trade-offs of information, touchings that could result in the possibility of human error by his estimate. We had sorting and routing errors estimated to be about 16,000. Opportunities, I should say, sorting and routing error opportunities, 16,005 per week. Pour off, 5,000. Labelings, 15,000. And biohazard exposures, 5,000. And then our actual detected error rate, which of course, as you all know, is merely the faintest tip of the iceberg in this sort of business. Our average number of mismatched specimens per month was 40, and if we do that put a denominator of 100 patient days on it, it's 0.34, and the others there, unlabeled and mislabeled. Not all of this is an automation issue, but it is what we were capturing in the way of actual errors at that time. Our phase 1 we went live. We have an anniversary that we celebrate every year. On September 16th is Automation Day at OSU. I think it's also the admission day for California or something, but by a strange coincidence. But anyway, on 9/16 every year we get T-shirts and mugs and things. I don't remember if this is a mug year or a T-shirt year, but occasionally they come up with other things that we can get, but collectively we got a lot of mugs and T-shirts in our institution. We implemented version 5.1.1 SMART upgrade to what was then called SunQuest, now MySys. We implemented a serum and urine line for the pre-analytics, and they had the Atlas and the LX20 where the analyzers on there, the Bayer Atlas for the urinalysis and the LX20s, of which we had 2 at that point. And the separate hematology and coagulation line, which went live initially with just the Coulter Gen S cell counter. And this is a real picture. No kidding. The photographers at Beckman, I guess, come from Hollywood. They're in Brea, so they know how to do these kinds of things. It's actually not black like that. That far wall is full of the same kind of junk that's in your lab. But somehow through the magic of playing with pixels, they got it to look like Star Trek. It was cool. So right in front of you here, let's see it now. Here's the moment of truth. Will I be able to? Yes, good, okay. So here's the platform that initiates the whole bloodline for the blood counts, and the Gen S was down this way. And then over here, actually behind where we're standing, is the corresponding stockyard that begins the serum line, serum and urine line, that goes around. And you can't see the centrifuges, they're lost over here. And here's the aliquotter and the capper and etc. We'll go through all that in a minute. Anyway, that's and these are the people. And I want to particularly call your attention to two of these people. This fellow that I'm playing with the arrow on here is Kevin Shively, who was at that time basically the manager of the chemistry area. He's gone on to become the technical director of laboratories at the institution. And I have to say, he probably deserves at least equal credit with Carl Speicher, who was the director of labs that did all of the preliminary politicking and sales to get us to the point where the administration would agree to go through this project. So he had a major contribution. But then Kevin kind of shepherded the whole group through the process of actually bringing up the TLA. He deserves enormous credit for that. And then another person back here is Keith Mullins. If I can get this thing to work. Yes. Comes alive eventually. He's the fellow with the beard back here. And he is an absolute crackerjacks computer jock, bar none, who regularly solves major problems for us, and did so in this implementation. It really would not have been possible without those two folks. And then all these people played a major role, but those two especially. Okay. The Beckman-Coulter IDS, it's co-marketed. IDS, which is Ito Diagnostic Services, I believe, Dr. Teruaki Ito of Kumamoto, Japan. So I've actually had the chance to go there and meet Dr. Ito, and I'm very impressed by his operation. So it's the Beckman-Coulter IDS TLA that we're talking about here. And on the serum and urine line, we had automated centrifugation and aliquoting, the automated decapping and recapping, the routing and loading and unloading to the Bayer Atlas and the LX20s at that time, sorting for non-connected analyzers, and online refrigerated specimen storage, which is generally, of all of these things, and probably your group was similar. I don't know, although your group, when you came to see us, I wasn't there that day, I guess, but you're more sophisticated than our average group, perhaps. But the wow factor is usually this last thing, and I'll show you why in a minute. That's usually what kind of gets them rolling in the aisles. But note, for purposes of parallelism and comparing to your situation, we do have aliquoting. We have universal aliquoting, and we have automated decapping and recapping. Why? Because our situation is different than yours, as I learned today. We don't send things out to more than one location on the back end, and we receive things from a number of locations on the front end. So it makes more sense for us to do this, I guess, than it does for you. Here are the specimen storage, retrievable storage compartments. And these are the wow things. I mean, people realize that a test add-on is a thing of the past with this. I mean, basically the order for the add-on comes through the system. The system finds the specimen in this addressable storage, brings it back out, sends it to the analyzer where the tests that are ordered happen, and all this happens without, assuming nothing goes wrong, all this happens without any human intervention at all. So that's usually what kind of gets them excited when they come see us. And this is just the inside of that box. Okay, our hematology coagulation line, we had the automated centrifugation for coag, and the routing and unloading for the Gen S. And initially, we had automated sorting for what was then an offline STAGO, S-T-A-R, or it was just an STA at that point, and the online ambient temperature centrifugation that was necessary for that. And this is the layout, we were fortunate in having, we took out one wall, a non-weight bearing wall. It was all that was necessary to be able to put this together. This is not the current layout. We've evolved from this so that we now have 2 U's basically. We've continued on this way down here, and we've added analyzers in here. We are, as I'll mention in a minute, we are the first lab in the world to electromechanically interface the then Bayer, now Siemens Advia Centaur immunochemistry analyzer to a TLA line like this, and it's worked very well. We're also the first, I'm proud to say, little Big Ten rivalry here. We were neck and neck with Northwestern to be the first to bring online through an electromechanical interface, the Stago STAR analyzer, coag analyzer. And even though they got theirs connected first, ours worked first. So there. Productivity impact. This is the kind, again, some of the things that I recommend you pay attention to now, get some baseline data. See, this is easy data to get. Here's the different categories of FTEs and their paid hours and worked hours, pre-TLA and then post just the phase 1 of TLA implementation. And you see we had some respectable rates of change there. All this change, let me say it now, and maybe I'll have occasion to repeat it, lest anyone be concerned, absolutely no one was laid off in the making of this film. Okay? No one was laid off in the making of this film. We handled everything by attrition, and it worked very well. Thank you very much. Ratios, economists are fond of ratios, and so I guess we got sucked into doing it too. You see the changes there. The ratio of technical FTEs to total FTEs increased. Processing FTEs to the total went down. Supporting hours to total paid hours stayed the same. Supervising, somebody asked me this during the day, and I didn't have the number in my head, but you see actually supervisors, the ratio of supervisors to everybody else went down slightly. And the ratio of MTs to MLTs. Okay, volumes. Well, it's a changing world. It took us a while to implement, so actually there was growth in our specimen volume in our build tests. So we went up from 3.3 to 3.4 million during this period. Added 40,000 processed tubes and 12,000 requisitions, and about 8,000 of those were manual, just during the period of phase 1 implementation. So the overall productivity of labor then, in terms of tests per FTE, changed favorably during post phase 1, so there's a 27% increase. Phase 2, tests per paid hour, tests per worked hour. We've subsequently been looked at, examined, evaluated by some expert consultants. This was in connection with an outreach project, basically, from Chi Lab Systems. Some of you may know that name. They have a nationwide database of some 400 laboratories, and they have cost per test information from all those 400 laboratories. We, at that time, which was a couple of years after the initial implementation of the TLA, actually, we were at that time the peer best performer in the nation in terms of cost per test. We'd managed it very well. That was a combination of heavy automation and low rates of pay. We practiced serfdom in the Midwest. Actually, it's not low rates of pay. The rates of pay, the buying power, relative buying power was fine. I mean, it was also low cost of living. Let's be fair to ourselves here. Specimens per processing FTE, specimens per processing paid hour, and requisitions for processing paid hour. You see all these were favorable changes. So we're getting a lot more done, and shaved a significant amount off of our in-house turnaround time. In fact, when we first went live, we were able to bank on this and no longer made, at least for a time, we're no longer making distinctions between stat and routine specimens within the lab because we had reduced our overall turnaround time sufficiently to be able to do that. Subsequently, we've had to back off on that slightly because of pressure from the emergency department. I'm sure you have nothing like that here. For selected cardiac analytes. So our phase 1 results then, productivity increased 27% in the analytical portion of the operation, specimen processing 72%, requisition handling increased somewhat, and paid hours reduced by 18%, and the test volume increased by 2%. Negative factors, though. We had temporary, and this is part of one of my kind of major messages here today. We had ended up with temporary staffing increases due to the SunQuest upgrade on the SMART system in order entry, and I'll show you just why that was a problem here in a minute. That just happened to coincide with some probably long overdue wage increases. Changes in the staffing mix resulting in more highly compensated operators being involved in processing and a decrease in billed test revenue, which again had nothing to do with productivity per se. So here are the five screens that the two screens actually that preceded this were replaced by with our version change. This is what people had to go through now in order to get a patient registered. So it was more complex and time-consuming than the original DOS-based order entry system, and people took a long time to get this. Increased time for the new operators to reach full production level. So here's kind of the view from the labor intensity, if you will. No difference in the number of steps for order entry, but a 4% increase in the number of manual activities necessary to get those same number of steps produced with only slightly increased volume, as opposed to specimen processing, where we reduced the steps and reduced the manual activities considerably. So overall, we had a reduction, but we were moving backwards in the area of temporarily in the area of order entry because of this set of screens that we had. And actually, as I was sharing with people, it came to a crisis within about 6 months, 5-6 months of initial implementation. We had a situation where we actually had to add staff. Turnaround times had not stabilized at the new levels yet. And so we actually had some prominent members of the medical staff confronting us and saying, you got the hospital to pay $3 million for what? we don't see it yet. I mean, show us the beef. So we pleaded for, I should say Carl Speicher, who was my predecessor at that point, pleaded for mercy and understanding and patience, and got it. He was a very persuasive man, thank goodness. So here is this ratio of order entry steps to specimen processing steps, and notice that it went from 1.5 to 1 to 3 to 1, and the manual activities, that ratio reversed. So we went from, for the ratio for specimen processing, order entry to specimen processing from 1 to 1.3 to 3.1 to 1. So when we got to reviewing things formally after phase 1 had concluded, we realized that we had a lot more we could do and needed to in phase 2. We wanted to consolidate all our TDMs, which were floating all over the place on individual boxes, on the LX20 since we had channels available for those. We moved to the automated immunology analyzers and brought up automated slide making and staining capability, were the things we had in mind at that point. The questions at that point were the impact of pre-barcoded specimens. How much information must the operator enter manually upon specimen receipt? The impact of the full ward order entry system. Would that include point of order barcoding? And if not, how many steps in the order entry process would that eliminate? These were more formal questions we had. So phase 2 was a change in our, well beyond the laboratory, a change in our hospital information system, which at that time was called SMS Envision. So we implemented computerized order entry, and that was substantially implemented with the help of the amazing political help of our leader, the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Hagop Mokshin, otherwise known as the Enforcer or the Godfather. He made it. He's very, very pro automation, very pro informatics and computing, and he's not easily crossed by anybody. So he laid down the law and said, you will go ahead with this. You will enter your test orders. And by God, they did. I'm still amazed. And then we brought up the Bayer Centaur immunochemistry analyzer, interface to the serum line. And as I said, we were the first first lab in the world to do that. Goals for phase 2 was substantial implementation of remote computerized order entry, but first of all, without the point of order barcode labeling, consolidation and interfacing of the immunochemistry testing on the automated line, and then reassessment of our staffing. Expected results were a reduction in manpower requirements in special chemistry with the consolidation of the Centaur. Phase 3 then was to interface the coag analyzer and the automated slide-making staining system on the hematology and coag line, which we did. Again, that'll be different than your situation. Phase 4, which I have to come before you today and admit we have not completed. That's that first thing for some reason. There's something, hospital administrators differ, and in your case I think they have a phobia against order entry, computerized order entry, physician order entry for some reason. So it keeps recycling down to the bottom of the list. In our case it's barcoded wristbands. It seems to be it's been aesthetically unacceptable up until fairly recently when it became a national patient safety goal, so suddenly people are on it. And next time I give this talk, I'm hoping to be able to no longer have to say that. But as we speak, it's still edging its way up the budget priority list. We do have remote point of order barcoding, however, thank goodness. So these human error opportunities that we talked about, the sorting and routing errors, and the pour-off errors, zip. I mean, this is something you can count on with having TLA. This is kind of basically the reason to play, I think, by and large. We also saw, though, a decrease in labeling errors and in biohazard exposures because of our decapper, which we're very happy with, and ours works quite well. So 88% reduction in biohazard exposures, because it's actually popping those caps that give you all the aerosols. So our actual errors then, we see the mismatched specimens, unlabeled and mislabeled specimens, all with significant reductions. Some of this may be Hawthorne effect too. So labor intensity overall decreased by 40%. Our estimated opportunities for human error decreased by 71%, and the actual errors, at least, were in the same direction and mirrored that at 27%. Our biohazard exposures down 88%, and the reduction in the manually processed requisitions by 71% with CPOE. So that's our story. That's kind of the facts and figures, and again, I can't urge you strongly enough to capture a similar story here as you go through the same evolution that we've gone through. Now I want to go on to talking sort of more generally, and here's some applications of human factors engineering, and my principal mentor for a lot of this, book mentor, I should say, I've never met the man in person, is James Reason with his classic book, Human Error, one of many, now several really good texts available in this subject. But he talks a lot about the irony, what he calls the ironies of automation, and I want to get into that a little bit with you, because this is kind of some of the conceptual related to doing this. I mean, so far from the numbers I've shown you, you can basically see it's a story that you expect to hear in a way. The only thing counterintuitive is what happened to us with the smart upgrade and the kind of the backpedaling we had. But might there be some downside or some complexity to automating that we need to be cognizant of as we go into this new territory? And yeah, I think the short answer is yes. We've learned that now after our years of experience, that there's some things, some take-homes from going through this that may become important. So macro-automated work environments, well, you know, there are the famous classic examples, and I'll show you remind you of some particularly important examples of failures in such environments, where the margin for operating error becomes shaved. It becomes extremely low. In a sense, you can sort of parody the intention of the engineers involved, the designers involved, to say they're really trying to get rid of people. They're trying to design everybody out of the system at some level. And that's sort of but in these environments, people are still there. And this is a very important point. The tasks that those people perform now are transformed. And actually, what I'm here to tell you today, a part of what I'm here to tell you today, is that the people who remain and the people who choose to out of in the organizational change and evolution that occurs at a time like this in the institution's history, the people who opt for and become part of the highly automated environment actually have new skills, new opportunities, and new things they need to be able to do that more reliably. And actually, there are fewer of the things they generally don't like doing, because those are the things that are easy to automate and do get effectively automated. So one thing that everybody's involved with in the macro-automated environment is just monitoring the system and providing the possibility of manual override when it's necessary, and control, and then troubleshooting the system. That involves, though, kind of being with it, maintaining alertness and concentration for long periods of time to screen for system failures, and that, in the absence of a lot of bells and whistles and decision aids, is hard for folks to do. So providing manual override and control requires you use your noodle. I mean, this is that logical thinking that's supposed to be emphasized in problem-solving kinds of thinking skills that are now increasingly being emphasized in medtech curriculum. But the training becomes progressively less rather than more available to operators as the systems become more reliable. The Maytag man, if you think about that poor guy, actually is losing his skills are gradually deteriorating over time because nobody's calling him. So I'm going to argue today that basically one thing you, especially as an institution well known for the continuing education you provide to med techs and lab medicine personnel generally, ought to get into this area of creating scenarios and training to increase the ability to troubleshoot. So it requires the operator to think. Med techs become more like doctors. They're basically diagnosing states of the system and then intervening. So training to troubleshoot, as you know, is increasingly based on a library of things that we know have gone wrong or can expect, and kind of can put into place, if you will, under following the category of following our instructions. But under stressful conditions, remember this is more of a factory, not less than it has been. Humans tend to revert to things that are a little more spacious in time and place. And in this case, those will have been primarily with monitoring and adjusting the system within normal operating limits. So here's an irony. This is the irony of automation of James Reason as applied to our situation. Here's another this notion of opaqueness that Reason talks about, modern high-tech systems. So we've got all of this computer control, and we've got levels of defense against things screwing up. The system is increasingly smart and increasingly has subsystems to kind of monitor stuff. The trouble that there is a price, however, that's paid for that, and the price potentially is conceptual. Certainly in other forms of highly automated manufacturing environments, that ends up being the case. And my thesis is that we will eventually see some evidence of that in macro-automated labs as well. So the conceptual distance of the operator from the processes being controlled. In fact, one person may not truly know what's happening with the system at a given moment. I gave you an example of that already in our refrigerated specimen storage area. An add-on test can happen without anybody realizing that it's occurring. So anyway, these systems that are prone to this kind of thing tend to be highly complex. They're nonlinear, tightly coupled components with very little slack built in for a recovery time. And that, although as human factors engineering increases and our knowledge of how to prevent error increases, that is changing. So there are, for example, supposed to be really, the people that are worried about global warming, some of them, subsystem of them now, are really pushing nuclear power once again, because supposedly we've got nuclear power plants available that are so smart that 3 Mile Island can't happen. Guess I'll believe it when I see it. Okay, systems disasters. Opaque systems are, whoops, let me go back. These are the classic systems that you all know about from your collective interest, I'm sure, in human error. So, or just reading the newspaper over a long enough number of years. There was 3 Mile Island, of course, with the shutdown there. Bhopal with the gas leak from the Union Carbide facility due to failure of maintenance procedures and a planning of the facility, a variety of them. The infamous O-rings of the Challenger shuttle mission. And last but not least, Chernobyl and shutting it down incorrectly. So each one of these had two kinds of, here's one of your objectives, two kinds of human errors involved. There are the active errors, which are attributable and can be where we can go for a root cause, and lo and behold, we find the root cause is the person running it. Showed up drunk that day, whatever it was. Active errors of the frontline operating personnel. And then the latent errors, which were built into the system, so to speak, were present and existing undetected, often for long periods of time preceding the failure. And involving these kinds of things, soft, touchy-feely management types of things, issues, these also become increasingly important as we get more highly automated. Strategic and planning decisions, the people in charge or supervising this become a different kind of burden to think and solve problems falls on them too. It's two sides to that. It makes their job more interesting, makes them accountable for more potential harm. And then workplaces where things are just loony. It's too hot, the lights are on too loud, too strong, we've got radios blasting, and whatever. You fill in your own scenario there for distractions that shouldn't be in this environment. And then inadequate systems or abilities to detect errors and then feed back to the operator. So analysis of root causes of nuclear power plant safety incidents show that more than 90% of them are man-made. These are well-known, very old statistics. But fewer than 20% of those man-made incidents, problems, originate with the people that are actually running the thing. Most of them, the other 80%, are deficiencies of procedures, lack of operator training, poor planning, insufficient supervision, or policymaking issues. And certainly, if you think back on what you remember of the Challenger, the O-rings in the Challenger, you can kind of get a feel for it there. So here's a kind of a pie chart showing, and the International Nuclear Power Organization had analyzed this many years ago, 1983, kind of breaking down where things happen. And I think, have thought for some time, and I've actually lived long enough to see a few examples in our shop, of that macro-automated clinical labs would sooner or later be in this category, that we'd have some of this show up. And I'm going to share with you an incident, a near miss, that occurred at Ohio State back in 2004 that illustrates some aspects of this, I think, perhaps. So on March 28th of that year, we've got some very sharp PharmDs roaming our halls. You do too, I'm sure, that are kind of all over this stuff like flypaper when drug test results don't come back quite the way I expect, therapeutic drug monitoring tests. So in this case, patient's antibiotic dose should have given rise to a higher TDM result. They brought that to our attention. And the med tech involved determined that the instruments produced a high value for each one of the patient's results. But in fact, the lab information system reported a less than instead. There was an immediate change made to the LIS to prevent further aberrant result reporting. That's kind of like closing the barn door after the horse has bolted. The index case, of course, was fixed, was corrected, and then got into further investigation mode. March 30th, and I recommend that you do this sooner probably than we did, talk to risk management. They were actually the first hospital people we talked to. The error is, and it turns out on investigation, the root cause was that the error resulted from a software upgrade to the chemistry analyzer on February 10th, 2004. That was done on site by the instrument vendor. And the lab didn't realize that lab result reporting might be impacted by this because the controls were run, all the kind of routine verification that we had in place at that time was all okay, it was clean prior to go live, so we didn't suspect anything. What had happened actually though, that the vendor failed to reset the correct instrument default settings specific to our site. And that altered the data transfer to the LIS interface of all results beginning with a greater than for these 8 drugs. So results above the linear range, the instrument linear range, then it required dilution, all failed to send a message to the LIS. And since that field was empty, it was seen as a null result, and that triggered a calculation leading it to report the lowest reportable value with a less than, when actually it was high. The actual lowest reportable specimen values were collectively reported, so we ended up with 2 groups that we couldn't discern here, truly very low values and truly very high values. On April 1st, the dreaded Dr. Mokshin himself was consulted on this, and you don't want to be in the room when he's consulted on something like this. There was a earth tremor that occurred. It was detectable, I think, probably in Seattle. So Dr. Gewirtz, who had this pleasant job of kind of dealing with all this, sent a memorandum to all the OSUMC and our secondary site, OSU East, staff, resident fellows advising them. The outcome was that from February 10th to March 28th of that year, had been 187 results on 8 analytes that were reported as the lowest reportable value. And that ended up including, as we said, a mix of both the very low and very high results due to the high volume of testing at that time. This is one of the things that ended up being changed as a result of this. We were only archiving enough to be able to see 26 of those 187 results that could be verified. Of the 26 results, 2 of them were incorrect. And that led to became inability to discern, led to an extended chart review by Dr. Goertz, and previous and subsequent results or the clinical history consistent with the less than result ended up being correct in many cases. But due to the inability to definitively determine the generated result, the less than results were all reported during a period, were all amended. They all had to be amended. The test charges were all credited. Letters were sent to the ordering physician to this effect. Our previously reported value may be inaccurate, blah, blah, blah. You don't want to have to do this very often. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. And again, my point is you could end up doing this an awful lot if things like this happen very frequently. So the corrective actions were, the procedures were revised to require a dilutional verification of any less than values for these drugs. The LIS programming was modified to require that any information sent to the LIS became numeric. So these less than, greater thans became less of a problem, and that prevented the calculation from running on the null result. Following instrument software upgrades and prior to resuming patient testing, we went into a test mode, or we now go into a test mode. This is all revised procedures that resulted from this incident. Checking the instrument default settings, the calculation, reconfirming all the calculations, and looking at the literature, reviewing the literature accompanying the software change, and looking for a retention of all instrument-derived results that were being created. So that was our near miss that I offer as an example of kind of what can happen in this environment, lest you think otherwise. So these are the kinds of things I think you want to be training for in the macro-automated lab of the future. It's an exciting place, and I think there will be. I confidently predict that when people flow to different tasks as labs reorganize along this way, that a significant number of people will opt for working in these environments because there are actually new opportunities there for them. So then my little homily finally. High-level management, as you know, probably often respond to quality and safety problems caused by one of these three ways. They deny, and that's also Kubler-Ross's original stage of coping with death and dying, is to denial. Either of the existence or the importance of the information, and that's called stonewalling. And you know a classic example of that is unfortunately, Maryland General Hospital. And you all know what happened there and some of the problems that arose from that. Repair is perhaps a better approach. Public relations and service recovery, we certainly need to do some of that, and we did that in this case. And that's we would call colloquially damage control. And then finally reform through communication and process improvement, which we hope is always going on. But as clinical labs become macro-automated, we have the opportunity to learn, I think, from the experience of these other highly automated workplaces, and we should do that consistently and carefully, and I think you can be leaders in this, actually, in a way. To understand the fundamental importance of error detection, to feedback control, the basis of becoming a learning organization, understanding, for example, that error detection, error feedback is how we all learn, after all. So that needs to be built in to the system, and opportunities to learn from possible states that this highly automated system can attain need to be fed into as regular training scenarios to the workforce, I believe, in the future. And I will, I believe, stop there. Yes.